Angie, it is such an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much
Oh, you
for taking a minute out
too.
today. Yeah, as I sent over, I have a blog that I've kept on my son since he's been 3. He's on the spectrum. He's 20 years old, and it's been really hard as a parent to read anything in the special needs world. It's like
Yeah.
it's just difficult. But your book just really did something spectacular that got me into that genre, and I totally appreciate it. The way you orchestrated it, how you got there. So I'm deeply appreciative. It's a wonderful
Oh,
read.
that's so great. Thank you so much for saying that. I know a lot of people don't want to read about, stuff that, is too close to their lives and all of that sort of stuff. So I totally understand and I appreciate that you gave it a try and that it spoke to you.
Well, and you're a wonderful writer. It was so easy to get into it. So my question to you is, when did you decide that you were going to write about the pandemic and how you were going to go about it? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I actually didn't intend to write about the pandemic. I had been working on this book starting in 2018 before my first novel came out,
Yeah.
was published. I was in that time when the edits were done and I was just basically waiting and I was doing some events and pre-pub stuff for Miracle Creek. And so I started, on the second novel. And at that time, it was a very different book. It was a quirky family drama about a father who's into happiness experiments, trying to maximize and quantify happiness, and wanting to publish a nonfiction book about that, and his family wanting to help him. And so that was all I knew. And I was doing a lot of sort of marinating, researching, free writing as I do at the beginning of a project. And that was going on for several years, especially with Miracle Creek coming out and, book tour and all of that sort of stuff. And then it was really around June of 2020 when I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I need to get started on this book. And I really, really tried. And, even with my really telling myself, okay, let's go through, all my notes from the last couple of years and figure this out, I could not get started. I was just kind of like, I don't remember how it feels to be a person before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And all of my free writing and all of that sort of stuff had been from before that.
Yeah.
And so I, sort of told myself, you know what, I'm going to give myself permission to write like starting now. So I had the first sort of day that Mia, the narrator, starts writing be in June of 2020, which is when I had been in. And basically gave myself permission to sort of like write about how it feels for a family to be going through something in the middle of the pandemic. And I sort of thought, you know what? When I had no idea how long the pandemic was going to be, what the result was going to be. So I sort of said, whenever I'm done with this book, I will I will always have the option to edit that out, because
Yeah.
I revise, my writing pretty severely anyway. And so I had sort of told my agent and my editor who bought the book in December of 2020. And we had sort of said, yeah, you just keep on, like, I'll just keep on writing. And at the end, when we're about to publish, we can figure out, from a marketing perspective, is that the kind of thing that we want to do? From a thematic perspective, is that the kind of thing we want to do? And then when I finished, I just realized that it wasn't even just about taking out some of the plot points that I had used the pandemic for,
Yeah.
but that somehow a lot of the sort of themes of the book were reinforced by it taking place during the pandemic. So,
Yeah.
for example, the whole baseline question with respect to happiness, well, our society's baseline completely changed during the pandemic. And what better illustration of that? And then also, like, even things like the masks that we all wear. because Eugene, who's a character in the book, always has a smile on his face due to his Angelman syndrome, which kind of functions as a mask.
Yeah.
And so having a physical mask across his lips kind of freed him from that assumption that people made that he had a smile on his face, so therefore he was happy all the time.
Yeah.
And like things like that just kind of came out
Yeah.
in a way that felt cool. And by the time the book was done at the end of 2022, we thought it would be published in 2023 or 24. By then we had like all forgotten kind of what June of 2020 felt like. So there were elements of the book that felt like a time capsule.
Yeah.
And so we all sort of thought, that's kind of cool. So let's leave that in.
Absolutely. And the one thing that you honed in on was the existential dread that parents of special needs kids go through. Like what really was going on. And there are all these scenarios because for a parent, the biggest fear is to be separated from your child.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's all these scenarios that the family's playing through. What if this is happening? Because when you're in that scenario, when you live in that pressure cooked world, anything could be taking place and it's the happiness quotient. Everybody
Yeah.
needs to take care of themselves. So my curiosity is this: how did you get such a bead on that idea of the special needs parent and the kid and the dynamics? How did that happen?
So my first novel, Miracle Creek, also has to do with that. Although Miracle Creek is more written from the parenting perspective. So
Yeah.
most of the POVs, there are 7 POV characters in that book, and most of them are the parents or, adults. And there are some parents that are going through something that's kind of a little bit similar with respect to the extreme parenting sacrifices, as far as being an immigrant family, and being a parent in that world, and the physical separation from your child that can happen in that world as well. So these are all things that I've kind of had experience with. I am an immigrant myself, so I'm the only child of 2 people who, kind of made that sacrifice for me coming from Korea to the US. I didn't speak English, so I went through that whole thing of like, not being able to understand or speak and how that feels, even though it was very temporary. And so it's nothing like what, a kid like Eugene, who's a non-speaker, for his whole life. I realize it's not the same extreme, but I had a little taste of that and just the agony of that and the frustration of that. Um, so I've gone through that. And then I didn't start writing until I was in my 40s. And being a writer's, I joke and say it's my 5th career. And my 4th career, which is what gave rise to the writing, is I'm the mom of 3 boys, all of whom are fine now. That knocking sound that you hear is my knocking on wood. They're all great. I have an empty nest and all that, but they all had medical issues as babies, and they were all different types of issues. And one of my kids had ulcerative colitis and celiac disease and was deaf in one ear. And so he needed, and apraxia. So he needed lots and lots of the kinds of therapies and experimental medical treatments and things that brought me into sort of the world of the special needs parenting world in the
Yeah.
DC area.
Gotcha.
So I did a group hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is what Miracle Creek is about, with some people who have become some of my best friends, whose kids have autism or cerebral palsy. And so through my relationships and friendships with these families and my own experience as a mom going through sort of the trauma of seeing your child in pain and having medical issues and being these medical mysteries that get, sort of sent around from department to department in the children's hospital. I kind of got to know some of these feelings, and I wanted a way to discuss that without it being in nonfiction essay form,
Yes.
which, because I think that there was, a part of me that didn't want to sort of take my kids and my family's stories and kind of tell them without their permission. And they were just too little, to give that kind of permission.
Yeah.
My first career was as a litigator. My husband was also a litigator. And so, like, from that perspective, we were like, yeah, talking about our kids' medical issues might kind of, lead to some future insurability problems, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I decided to pursue fiction. So that's how I came to start writing.
So I'm curious about your love of reading and writing. How did that begin for you?
Well, I've always been an avid reader.
Yeah.
Starting in Korea, being a bookish kid with no, siblings, obviously. So obviously that's something that I've been very, very into. And then when I came to the US, I only had a few Korean books that I was allowed to bring over.
Yeah.
My parents and I were very poor, and so we didn't really have books anyway. We lived in one room of somebody else's house, so there was like no bookcase, or anything like that that I had access to. And so and not speaking English, I just kind of reread my few Korean books over and over again. And I started kind of imagining what was happening between the scenes after the book was over, before the prequel, if you will. And I started kind of acting them out. Again, lonely kid with no friends,
Yeah.
unable to sort of fit in. And so that's kind of how it started for me, as
Yeah.
far as that kind of obsessive reading and thinking about the characters and story building and world building.
So did you have dreams of coming to America? How did that transpire?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story. So my family, my extended family,
Yeah.
was here,
Yeah.
in the US, in the Baltimore area. My aunt was my mom's best friend growing up, and they are two sisters of seven, eight, something like that. Some kids had died, early in childhood. So we kind of like lose, we always are kind of like, wait, how many kids are there now?
Yeah.
But they so my aunt came here as an RN in the Johns Hopkins system, and so in the Baltimore area. And then my aunt and then my grandmother came over, and so one family by family, my aunt kind of sponsored all of us to come. And I think because we were so poor in the US, that was something kind of a dream, for my parents. And also with their only child, me, being a girl, and the huge amounts of misogyny that was kind of tolerated at that time that I was growing up, I think really made my parents want to come over. The really kind of shocking story, which I wrote about for the New York Times for the op-ed in November of 2016 during the election period, is that when I was in third grade, my teacher asked, like, who wants to, run for class president? I had raised my hand along with some other kids. I was the only girl to do so. The teacher had me come to the front of the classroom, hold up my hands to receive a ruler strike, because, that was for the sort of my daring to think that a girl could be president of anything.
Wow.
And that was the day that I came home. I told my mom about the story. My mom was furious, like ran over to the school to talk to the principal, came out. Apparently, the principal was very nonplussed about it. My mom and my dad were like completely just out of their minds.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that made them decide, okay, let's really do whatever we have to do to pursue the possibility of going to the US. And so I started, I think we got our visa like 2.5 years later, 3 years later, something like that.
So what when you started getting a grasp of English, what were you reading? What were some books that you really took in?
So one of the first pieces that I wrote in my 40s when I started, taking classes for creative writing, which I had never really done before. Um, and this was an essay, but it was actually about how I tried to teach myself English by reading books.
Yeah.
And so I raided my aunt's bookshelf, and she was a huge fan of Sidney Sheldon. I don't know if you know Sidney
Yeah.
Sheldon
Uh-huh.
or who. Okay, so there was this book called Rage of Angels, and I was very Catholic at that time and very religious, and so I was like, oh, angel, and I'm thinking like this is about the fallen angel or something. And so I start reading it because my aunt had told me, the best way to learn a language other than just speaking it, but it's really hard when you don't know really like any words
Yeah.
whatsoever. And she said she had really made a lot of progress by taking a bookmark and writing down all the words that she didn't know and reading a fun book, like that, and then using the dictionary to look them up, and then memorizing the phrases and the words that seemed really good. So I did that with Rage of Angels, and that was not an appropriate thing to have done. And the essay that I ended up writing was a humor essay, because you can imagine there's a lot of sex in it. There's the mafia. There's like, and so the phrases that I memorized from that were definitely not appropriate for middle school kids, and also they were like, just totally out of context. I think I just earned a lot of puzzled looks from some
Yeah.
of the phrases that I tried out from that.
Yeah. So what was the first piece that you wrote where you got a visceral experience from somebody and you felt like, I have it. This is something I can do with my life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really was the first short story that I finished. So I did start with some of these essays and things like that. And even though I tried to stick to my own experience and make sure that I was only telling my story, of course that's really really hard to do, because you can't just leave out other people in your life.
Yeah.
And so that's when my husband, reading through some of them, he said, I feel like you're really trying hard to avoid having to talk about other people and whatever. And he was like, why not just give yourself the freedom of trying fiction?
Yeah.
And I was like, fiction? I don't know how to write that. So I took classes, short story classes, and it really was, I think it brought me back. I don't think I realized it at the time, but I think thinking back on it, I think it brought me back to that time when I was creating stories, when I was reading these Korean books, um, and the few books that I still had that I could understand, and trying to fill in some of the stuff in the middle, and that creation process. So it was partly that, and I think it was also just the kind of the freedom of taking sort of anchoring experiences that I wanted to really explore more, and doing it from not from my own perspective, but from the perspective of somebody else. Giving some of the same issues that I had been puzzling over to other people who were not like me, maybe who were, male instead of female, like who are maybe who weren't immigrants, maybe who were white and who didn't have that sort of sense of being an outsider, but still having some of the same issues and some of the same puzzlements and things that I was kind of self-interrogating. And so going through some of that was really interesting, and also really fun, like from a creative perspective, but
Yeah.
also the outcome was so enlightening, in that, I did get to sort of see different sides of some of these same issues that I had been sort of going through in my mind over and over again. So giving some of those thoughts to other people, being able to see the other facets that I hadn't thought through as Angie Kim. Um, and so like having a lot of these like light bulb, aha moments, which was very fun and enlightening as well. So all of those things combined together. And then finally, just like reading this thing that I had, you know, um, really struggled over and maybe workshopped and then revised, and then like feeling that sense of completion.
Yeah.
It was really satisfying. And I sort of thought, so I had gone through from career to career. So I had been a lawyer, I had been a management consultant at McKinsey, I was a dot-com entrepreneur during the whole like, tech era, the boom, of the 2000, the like late 90s, early 2000s, and and then being a stay-at-home mom. And through all of that, I think I had sort of been wanting to find that thing that combined sort of the micro level day-to-day happiness,
Yeah.
like not hating what you're doing anyway, which is how I felt doing being a lawyer. Except for the courtroom parts, which I did love. I hated everything else. So like having that micro level enjoyment and satisfaction, and then at the same time the macro level enjoyment, so combining those two things, like that satisfaction, that you're doing something that you're proud of, and that you're proud of yourself. So like I felt like when I finished a short story and I had revised it a bunch and I read it and I was satisfied with it, and I thought, okay, it's ready to send out and submit to literary magazines. I remember like thinking, this is what I have been looking for, going from job to job, career to career, you know, trying to find this combination of the micro and macro level happiness and satisfaction that I now feel right now.
So, who's been your hero? You obviously have had this big dream and a host of dreams in your life. Who has been that inspirational force that's allowed you to find who you are, find your voice?
I mean, it probably depends with respect to like at each phase of my life. But certainly from when I started writing, I mean, there are so many literary heroes that I have, but there are so many things that and people and books I'm looking at in front of me right now. I'm just kind of getting lost a little bit in my words because I'm looking and I'm trying to think like, who do I want to? I mean, I think that some of my literary heroes are, people like Ishiguro, who is amazing in that I feel like he's not bound by any particular genre, which I love. Like he started with, Pale View of Hills is almost like a mystery. And then, and then there's Buried Giant, who even know what that is. And, there are sci-fi elements of Clara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go, and the historical fiction of, Remains of the Day. So, I mean, somebody like Ishiguro is somebody that kind of career and that kind of being able to change and being unafraid to change the genres, um, and not sort of sticking to the same formula or the same voice is something I really, really admire.
So really writing in earnest in your 40s, I'm curious. You have this dream of going in and being an author, and then it happens. What's been the difference between the dream of this career and this life and the fact that it's actually happening?
Um, it's funny because I don't think that I really dared have a dream of being an author with multiple books out. Because when I first started writing, it was just to write. Like that was the end in and of itself. And the only reason I think I wanted to even send it out to and submit to literary magazines is to have that experience of working with an outside editor, and making that better. And also a little bit of like, is my work actually, good? Is it kind of worthy of being in print, that kind of thing, rather than wanting to um, achieve something, which I feel like all of my previous careers had been about achievement, like achieving this, like wanting to go to the best schools, wanting to get, the highest salaries, and, wanting to get a promotion and, make partner and, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so I felt like it was writing is the first thing that I've done where it's really focused on the process rather than the achievement. And like when I was writing my first novel, Miracle Creek, I thought for sure that I was just kind of playing around, because it was kind of a murder mystery, and I had no idea like what had happened to cause the incident that results in people's deaths. Like I didn't know who did it or why or any of that. And um I'm looking at the sign now. I still have it up in my writing nook, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. And it's a sign right over my computer screen that says, "This is not a novel." And I wrote that and I put it up there as a reminder to myself that, like, when I was writing Miracle Creek, this was not going to be a novel. This was my just learning how to write a novel. And
Yep.
I was going to put it away in the drawer the way that, I'd heard that you do with your first attempt at a novel. And so when it was done and I workshopped it to people and I showed it to people and people said, "This is really good. You should really try to like get an agent and do all of these things." It kind of came as a surprise to me,
Yeah.
and so I think in that sense, and then I wanted to just kind of keep going because my agent, whom I love, was just so sure that I should. And so it was almost accidental.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think now that I have like two novels under my belt, the thing that really is so unexpected, I sort of thought once you like learn to write a novel, then you would just write novels. And it turns out it's like harder than ever. And I'm having like the hardest time right now writing
Yeah.
novels, and I'm like complaining about it. And I'm like, I think I used to be able to write, but I think something's happened to my brain, so I can't write anymore. And my husband's like, no, you said the same thing with Happiness Falls also. So I guess that's just it. Just writing one thing and having more experience in writing doesn't make it easier, which
Yeah.
is, sometimes that happens with other careers, but not so with writing,
Yeah,
sadly.
for sure. That's interesting. So let me ask you this. If you were to have a dream tonight and run into the 12-year-old version of you and you had a book, a coffee table book, and you gave it to that version of you and it's your life, how it turned out, all of your careers, being an author, would that version of you believe it?
I think so. I think that version of me would believe it. Um, and I think in a way, but I wonder if like that act of giving it to a 12-year-old me would change the way that it turns out, because I think so much of what I've done, and especially my writing, is fueled by my insecurities and my doubts. And so I think like knowing that everything turns out okay, I think ironically might actually unnerve me to the point where, or maybe like just make me so complacent that I don't try, and then it like all falls apart, you know?
Yep.
So I'm not sure. Yeah. So I don't think I would want to,
Okay. I
because I
like that
think
answer.
part of, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I dig it. So let me ask you this. Of everything that you've accomplished, and more importantly, evolved to, what are you ultimately the happiest about, the proudest of?
Um, I think definitely my kids for
Yeah.
sure. And my relationship with my kids and my husband. My husband and I just last night celebrated the 35th year of our meeting
Yeah.
each other. And then like I've been trying to figure out our Christmas breaks, and my kids are all over the place. And it really does seem like, like my oldest really wants us to come visit him. We're gonna all do something together to visit my parents, but then they need to leave early for something or another. But they really want to spend New Year's Eve, and they really want us to come to New York for that. So like that kind of thing, that brings me a lot of joy. And that's the one thing that I think I was worried when I was younger that I would not be able to have, is those close relationships, because I was such a lonely and isolated only child. So that was the thing that I was most insecure about, is my ability to connect with other people and to maintain those relationships and connections. And so being able to have that feels almost miraculous, you know what I mean? When
Yeah.
like and also because I had so many issues with my kids when they were little.
Yeah.
So like to have them be, like all relatively good. Obviously there are like little things that come up here and there, but be healthy. And, you know, um I just, that to me feels like the kind of thing that I almost can't believe. Whereas everything else, I think, everything else seems like, yeah, that's part of life. And I think the other part about this goes a little bit with your question from before about, being an author and having that particular dream of having your books published and stuff. Um, and that one of the things that's been surprising to me is that it just never stops. Like, I mean, I see some really accomplished writers that have everything that you think you could possibly want, and they're still struggling, and they're still sort of thinking, and I think they're right, that they're only as good as their next book,
Yeah.
and their next story. And so there is no kind of resting on your laurels, which I think does happen with like other careers. Like,
Yeah.
like once you've made it, you're like, yes, I'm a big time partner. I don't really have to do anything. I'll have like my minions go and do all the stuff.
Yeah.
But there is no such thing when
Yeah.
you're a creator.
For sure. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, my perception of me is, I don't think I have a defined perception of myself. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of why I write, is to try to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it fun, but also really frustrating. Yeah, and I think if I had a perception of myself that was kind of defined, I'm not sure that I would need to, keep on struggling, which
Yeah.
writing is such a struggle. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that answer. Again, Angie, it's so great to meet you. Thank you so much for opening up about your career. Again, Happiness Falls is just an absolute revelatory read. I thank you so much for putting it out into the world. Miracle Creek. If anybody wants to get the books, they want to learn more about what you're doing, anything in your world, where can they go?
They can come to my website, angiekimbooks.com, or they can connect with me on Instagram. Although I'm not really on social media much, I have to say these days.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay away from it for
Yeah.
health and writing productivity reasons. So probably the website.
Okay, excellent. I will put all those links in the show notes. So great to meet you. And again, thank you for writing the book and for taking some time out today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care.